They called it just a formality. That's what he said when I signed the original agreement, back when the company barely existed, when we were all crammed into a tiny space above a repair shop where the air smelled like burnt circuits and cold coffee going stale. Nobody asked too many questions back then. Everyone was too busy dreaming out loud about vision, funding, and ideas that didn't even exist yet outside of someone's imagination. But I wasn't dreaming. I was building. My first prototype came together from discarded parts and nights that bled into mornings. Trial. Error. Try again. And quietly, without any announcement or applause, that single invention became the foundation that the entire company would eventually stand on. Over time, more followed. Each one more refined than the last. Each one officially filed under the company name, but every single one conceived, designed, and brought to life entirely by me. The company grew fast. Faster than most people expected. From a struggling little idea in a cramped room above a repair shop, it expanded into a multi-floor organization with investors lined up, contracts rolling in, and a reputation built on technology that the world didn't know was quietly, completely dependent on my work. I didn't mind that at first. I genuinely believed that building something real mattered more than being credited for it. That the work would speak for itself. That doing the right thing, quietly and consistently, would be enough. I was wrong. And I didn't realize just how wrong until the day new leadership walked through the door, polished shoes, sharp suits, and the kind of confidence that has never once had to understand the thing it's controlling. That's when everything began to shift. And what happened next changed absolutely everything. It started small. Subtle enough that you could almost convince yourself it wasn't happening. Meetings that I used to lead began happening without me. Budget decisions were made in rooms I was no longer invited into. Engineers I had personally trained, people I had mentored from their first day, were quietly reassigned with no explanation, no conversation, no courtesy. Leadership called it restructuring. What it actually was something far more deliberate. It was the slow, careful erasure of my presence from the core of a company I had helped build from nothing. I noticed every single move, but I didn't react. Not yet. Because experience teaches you something important. People reveal exactly who they are when they believe no one is paying attention. Then came the day that removed all doubt. They stood in front of a room full of people, investors, partners, colleagues, and they presented my work, my systems, my years of effort. And they described it as if it had emerged naturally from the brilliance of leadership. As if discovery had simply happened. As if no one had spent years of late nights bringing it into existence. I sat in that room, watching my own creation be repackaged and represented, and I realized something with total clarity. I was no longer seen as part of the structure. I was being quietly replaced by it. That moment didn't make me angry. It made me clear. And clarity, in situations like this, is far more powerful than emotion could ever be. So I stopped reacting. And I started documenting. Everything. Quietly. Carefully. Because systems don't collapse from dramatic confrontations. They collapse from ignored dependencies. And I knew exactly where every dependency lived. What I had already put in place, the thing they had no idea existed, was about to change everything. The final moment arrived during a board meeting. They presented my original contract like it was a relic. Something outdated. Something that no longer applied. And then, in what I can only describe as a performance designed to send a message, they shredded it. They had completely misunderstood the situation. Because the real structure, the one that actually mattered, was never in that contract. It was embedded in a separate legal framework, quietly and carefully constructed over years, that they had never once bothered to look at. They had spent so long focused on control that they never stopped to understand what it was they were actually controlling. I stood up. I said one word, noted, and I walked out. Not because I was defeated. Not because I had nothing left to say. But because everything I needed to say had already been said, years earlier, written into systems and agreements they didn't even know existed. The consequences of their actions had already been set in motion. All I had to do was leave and let them unfold. What happened in the hours that followed wasn't something anyone in that boardroom could have prepared for. Behind the scenes, legal mechanisms began activating automatically. Patent dependencies were flagged across the company's entire portfolio. Licensing agreements started failing their validation checks. Internal systems that ran quietly in the background of every department, every client-facing platform, every core operation, began locking themselves under compliance protocols I had written into them years before. Protocols that were never meant to be visible, until they needed to be. Within hours, confusion spread. Engineers tried to access core systems and found themselves locked out with no explanation they could quickly solve. Clients began noticing instability in products and services they depended on. And executives, the same people who had stopped taking my calls, who had removed my name from presentations and my chair from meetings, were suddenly desperate to reach me. Messages. Calls. Requests marked urgent. I didn't respond immediately. Because timing is more powerful than urgency. Reacting to panic only gives panic more control. I waited. I let the situation develop on its own terms. And by the time I finally allowed communication to resume, the company was in what I can only describe as controlled chaos, unable to determine, on their own, which parts of their own structure were still stable and which were not. The board requested emergency meetings. Legal teams sent formal requests for clarification. And leadership, slowly, painfully, arrived at a realization they had never once considered before that moment. The person they had removed was not simply an employee. She was the foundation. And you cannot erase the foundation and expect the building to stand. But by then, it was no longer about negotiation. It was no longer about ego or recognition or even justice in any simple sense of the word. It was about something much more fundamental. It was about structure, about consequences, about what happens when the people who build things are treated as disposable and the systems they built finally reveal the truth. Because the blueprint always knows who drew it, even when everyone else has forgotten.